Namaste. Welcome to you all. Welcome to our virtual celebration of our 20th anniversary. We had chosen June 6th long ago as the date for our anniversary celebration this year. At the first of each year in January, we set out our calendar for the year, and in January, the virus was already an issue in China, but none of us could have imagined in January that it would result in the shutdown of so much here and around the world. Our ashram has been shut down now for about 3 months. We haven't had any programs, and obviously we can't meet for this anniversary program, but I'm delighted that we can gather here virtually, as they say, using this live streaming. This is our first Saturday morning webcast. This will be a regular program that we conduct starting today, every Saturday morning at 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We will have a live stream. It's nice that we can begin our Saturday morning webcasts with this anniversary celebration. And then going forward, starting next Saturday, we'll go to our regular class. So every Saturday morning, we have a regular class on Vedantic teachings from the Mahabharata. And I'm just, excuse me, I'm just checking here. And so that will be broadcast. My regular Saturday morning class will be broadcast starting next Saturday at 11 o'clock. You see me checking my computer here. This live streaming is something very new for us, and I'm not entirely comfortable with it. It's fairly complicated, at least for me. It's fairly complicated. I hope we don't have any technical problems. If your screen suddenly goes blank or goes crazy, I hope you will pardon us. We'll do the best we can to get things fixed. All right. This is our 20th anniversary. 20 years ago, we began our classes here in a small living room of a house, which is attached to our lecture hall, the house in which I live. And we began with, I think, 20 or 30 people on a weekday evening, and I think also on Saturdays, in a living room of a house. And our classes grew very rapidly. Within 1 year, we had 100 people crammed into this living room. Obviously, it was too much. And then several years after that, we were able to build the beautiful lecture hall where we've been meeting and where I'm sitting right now. 20 years ago, my guru, Puja Swami Tadatmananda Saraswati, came here to inaugurate our ashram. Prior to that, he had named our ashram Arsha Bodha Center. Bodha means wisdom. Arsha means of the ancient rishis, of the sages of ancient India. So this is the center where the wisdom of the ancient sages is taught. And so for these 20 years, we have been continuing our classes. Puja Swamiji came back for our first anniversary and several times after that. Our early celebrations were, anniversary celebrations were held outside in some large tent we had erected, and several hundred people would come. And throughout these 19 years, we've had hundreds of people joining us for our anniversary celebration. Today, of course, quite different. Our hall is not quite empty. I'm here. My assistant, Vasanti, is seated right there. So even though we can't have all of you join us here, many of you are joining us online, and that's I'm delighted for that. To our local New Jersey students, let me say I miss very much seeing you here for our classes. I know many of you are continuing to watch my videos and listen to the lectures on our website, but I miss seeing you here for our classes, and I really look forward to being able to resume our classes here as soon as possible. Right now, it's looking like maybe late summer. That's yet to be determined, but as soon as it is safe and legal, we will resume our classes here. Many of you have told me that in this time of the pandemic that you feel some anxiety. And certainly there's plenty of reason to feel anxious. There is a very real threat to your health for you and your family. Many of you have lost your jobs, at least temporarily. And for almost everyone, there's a total disruption in our daily schedule. All of that is very disruptive and in some cases traumatic, and certainly will cause anxiety. But we have to observe that today we see that the health threat from the virus is rapidly decreasing. Even here in New Jersey, which is an epicenter of coronavirus, the health threat is decreasing. Jobs are starting to come back, and our lives are gradually, slowly, returning to normal. All of that is good. The message is that this pandemic was definitely threatening and a challenge, but it was and is a challenge we can handle. It's not something that overwhelms us. In fact, you've all met bigger challenges in your life prior to this pandemic, and probably you'll meet bigger challenges in the future after this pandemic is over. So we can handle this, and there's no reason for so much anxiety. Just as many people have mentioned their anxiety, many people have also told me that this time of the pandemic has been an opportunity for them to be more focused on their spiritual practice, on their prayer and meditation and spiritual study. Many of them have at least temporarily lost their jobs. They have more time, and what better way to spend your time than by focusing on your spiritual practice. That's not only wonderful, but it's really, really important that now, at the time of this pandemic, it's crucial that our spiritual practice continue without interruption. Now, your job might be interrupted, and you don't have any control over that. Certainly your social activities have been interrupted, and there's not a lot of control we have over that. But it's crucial that our spiritual practice should not be interrupted at this time of the pandemic. And the reason for that is spiritual practice is required over a long, long period of time, not just days and weeks and months, but years and even decades are required for these spiritual teachings to be completely fruitful in transforming our lives. It's a fiction people have that, enlightenment is rapid. One day you get enlightened. And some people will refer to the story of Bodha, who sat underneath a Bodhi tree. And in the morning, he emerged from meditation enlightened. So someone might say, look at that, Buddha got enlightened in the course of one night's meditation. But they're ignoring the fact that prior to the night that Buddha sat underneath that Bodhi tree, he spent decades of intense austerities, tapas, and various kinds of spiritual practice that went on for decades before he finally sat underneath that Bodhi tree. So the message here is that spiritual practice that is fruitful takes time. And we can't afford to interrupt that spiritual practice at this time of the pandemic. It takes time because what we're engaged in is a process of complete, total inner transformation. This inner transformation is something amazing. It's very profound. It's very, very extensive in its nature. And because of we'll talk about this in just a moment, but because of the extensive nature of this inner transformation, it's going to take time. To explain this process of inner transformation, here's a new metaphor. I love metaphors and I love coming up with new ones. Here's a new one for you. Not an inner transformation, but an outer transformation. Outer transformation would mean a transformation of our bodies. And in this case, we're talking about the transformation in terms of losing weight. I need to lose 10 pounds of weight. Now, that external transformation of my body is going to take time. If I work really hard at it, it might take a year or more for me to lose those 10 pounds. So first of all, there's time involved in achieving that goal, and then having reached that goal, you know this very well, that after losing the weight, you can't return to the way your diet was before, but rather, at the end of your weight loss, you have to continue what doctors would call a permanent change in your eating habits. You can't go back to your old eating habits. It becomes a permanent, long-term change, continual change in your eating habits. This turns out to be a nice metaphor for the process of Vedanta. The 1 year of dieting to lose 10 pounds is equivalent to however many years of study and meditation and other spiritual practices, however many years it takes to gain that transformation of understanding. Again, we'll talk about it more in just a minute. But then, having gained that inner transformation, that shift of worldview, that change of thinking, then what follows is a permanent change in the way you think, in the way you behave, in the way you see the world. It leads to a permanent change of worldview. So a diet is a process that culminates in a permanent change of eating habits. And the metaphor here is that Vedanta is a process of inner transformation that concludes in a permanent transformation of your worldview. What is that transformation of worldview? We'll talk about it briefly. 3 different aspects. We talk about this for hours. I've chosen just 3 aspects to discuss at this time. One aspect of transformation of your worldview is this. We all start off in life thinking that many, many external things, events, and people are necessary for us to be happy, for us to be content, necessary for our well-being. To put it in other words, we all start off in life thinking that the source of happiness, contentment, and peace lies outside of us, in the things and people and events in our lives. What a life of spiritual practice, and these teachings of Vedanta in particular, what they lead us to is a complete transformation of that wrong conclusion. We start off with the wrong conclusion that the true source of happiness, contentment, and peace lies outside. But as a result of these teachings, we come to discover something very fundamental, something well known to you all, and that is the true source of happiness, peace, contentment, love, joy, lies within. And this is something that is not intellectually appreciated, but personally discovered through your own introspection, supported by meditation and led by these teachings. You come to recognize that the true source of happiness, contentment, and peace for me is indeed within. This is such an important transformation because prior to this transformation, we become dependent on external factors for our happiness and well-being. We become dependent on things in the world. We become dependent on certain events in our lives. And especially, we become dependent on certain people in our lives. In particular, we become emotionally dependent on certain people in our lives, and that's a problem. Emotional dependence is the antithesis of love. Love is giving. Emotional dependence is taking. It's hanging on someone, grasping, hanging on to them. That certainly isn't love. So with this first transformation we're discussing now, when you shift your thinking from thinking that that external sources are important for your happiness, peace, and contentment, when that gets shifted around fully 180 degrees, as we say, and you recognize that the true source of happiness, contentment, and peace is within, and when this is not merely intellectually appreciated, but it is personally discovered and realized, then all that emotional dependence goes away. You're no longer so concerned about things being just the way you want. And it's especially, I pardon me for making a small joke here, but it's not only important for you, it's important for your loved ones, because prior to this transformation, you're dependent on those loved ones and hanging on them for your sense of contentment and well-being after this transformation. You're no longer holding on to them so tightly, and they can breathe, so to speak. So this is one aspect of this inner transformation brought about through the teachings of Vedanta. Another aspect of this inner transformation is, how did I write it here? Another aspect of this inner transformation has to do with the problem of identification. We identify ourselves in terms of our bodies, in terms of our minds, emotions, in terms of our roles and jobs, etc. And this identification turns out to be a huge problem. The teachings of Vedanta lead you to discover that your true nature, this teaching you've already heard, your true nature is Sat Chit Ananda Atma. Atma, the true self, which is Sat, unborn, uncreated, unchanging. Chit, consciousness, awareness, which is Ananda, which is full, complete, limitless, and vast. That is your true nature, not this body and mind, etc. But due to ignorance, we all begin with this complete identification with our bodies and minds. And the problem with that identification is this. When you're identified with your body, the problems of your body become your problems. The problems don't belong to you, Satchidananda Atma. The problems belong to your body. But due to this identification, the problems become my problems. And my problems are pretty scary and intimidating. If there's a problem of the body, it's something more pragmatic. It's like if your car breaks down, you take your car to an auto mechanic. In the same way, if your body has a problem, you take it to the doctor. And it becomes something very pragmatic. Puja Swami Tadatmananda, my guru, said it in very simple terms. If you're identified with your body, you have problems. If you're not identified with your body, you have situations. That was a term he used. So we convert problems into situations. Problems are threatening. Situations are just facts that we deal with. If your car is broken, you get it fixed. If your body has some problem, you go to a doctor. A very pragmatic attitude that removes all the suffering and struggle and anxiety. The same holds true for our minds and for our emotions. When we're identified with our emotions, emotions like sadness and grief can be very threatening, very overwhelming. But when you come to understand that sadness is a normal human emotion that belongs to your mind, doesn't belong to you, and doesn't even affect you. The metaphor we use frequently in Vedanta is sadness is like dark clouds. Dark clouds can cover the sun, but those dark clouds don't affect the sun. In the same way, dark clouds of sadness and grief can affect your mind, no doubt, but they don't affect the consciousness, which is your true nature. In fact, through that consciousness, those clouds of sadness and grief are illumined, and your consciousness remains utterly unaffected by those dark clouds of sadness. So if you are identified with your mind, then those dark clouds are very threatening. If you're not identified with your mind, because you know your true nature is Satchidananda Atma, consciousness, you know your true nature is just consciousness, then you know those clouds of sadness don't truly affect you. Similarly, we get identified with our jobs. Let's take that as an example. Roles in general, but jobs in particular. Some of you may have lost your job right now, at least temporarily during this pandemic. And having lost your job, some of you might be very happy about that, but I'm sure some of you feel a sense of loss. Why would you feel a sense of loss? And not just for financial reasons. You might feel a sense of loss because you gained some sense of self-esteem. You felt good about yourself because of your activities in the job. Now, nothing terribly wrong with that, but the problem of identification is there. That is, when you're identified with the job, the problems of the job belong to you and affect you. How many people come home from a bad day at work in a really bad mood? They bring those problems of work home with them because they're identified with their jobs. If they weren't identified with their jobs, the problems would remain at work. They would leave their workplace, come home, and they would be fine. Anyway, there are so many examples we can give. I'd like to move on. But these are examples of how identification causes suffering. When we identify with our bodies, with our minds, with our jobs and roles, we cause suffering for ourselves and perhaps for others. But when these teachings, I'm still nervously looking over my shoulder just to make sure it's working, and it all seems to be working just fine. So, when these teachings of Vedanta lead us to discover that your true nature is just pure consciousness, Shuddha Chaitanya, then you become free from this identification with the body, mind, etc., and that leads to so much inner freedom. The problems of your body belong to your body. The problems of your mind belong to your mind. And you, as pure consciousness, are totally free from any such problems. The last area of inner transformation to discuss this morning has to do with our relationship with the world around us. We generally consider the world to be absolutely real. Everything we experience seems so real. But both Vedanta and modern science help us understand that the world is not as real as it seems. Science, this is a scientific example I've given in many classes. I'll give it briefly here. We think things are real. It certainly feels solid, the arm of this chair. But according to science, this chair is made of atoms. Atoms are made of tiny nuclei with some even tinier electrons buzzing around. In between the nuclei and electrons is empty space. Every atom is almost entirely empty space. This chair is made of atoms. It's almost entirely empty space. My hand is made of atoms. It's almost entirely empty space. Why does it feel so solid? This is an illusion brought about due to nature in this case. I'll bore you with the scientific details. Is the outer layer of each atom are electrons, which are negatively charged. The outer layers of the atoms, the electrons in the atoms of this chair are negatively charged. The electrons in the outside of the atoms of my hand are negatively charged. And as you may have heard, negatively charged particles repel each other. And that's why the arm of the chair seems solid. It's not. Your hand isn't solid. The chair isn't solid. Nothing is solid. This is simple science. And science gets much more complicated than that, so we'll call this simple science, demonstrating that the world is not as real as it seems. Vedanta takes this to the nth degree. Vedanta reveals to us, helps us understand that everything we experience in Vedantic language is nama and rupa, name and form. And these names and forms come and go. They're constantly changing. And the names and forms are not real. What's real is the content. I have a pot here. This is my favorite prop or metaphor. So this pot is nama and rupa, name and form. But pot is nothing but clay. Nama rupa is not real. Clay is real. This is a huge Vedantic topic, but just to treat it very simply and quickly, suppose we extend that concept and appreciate the fact that not only is that pot nama-rupa, the entire cosmos is nama-rupa, and just as the pot name and form are transient, what is real is clay, in the same way the entire cosmos is nama-rupa, transient. It's the underlying reality that we call Brahman. That's absolutely real. Yes, this is fairly philosophical, but it's an important philosophical teaching of Vedanta. What it helps us realize is the same thing that science teaches us, and that is the world is not as real as it seems. And there's a really important take-home message from that observation. The world is not as real as it seems. The world is not as real as you. Your true nature as consciousness is more real than the world. The world is less real than your true nature. And the point here then is, if the world is not absolutely real, how can it harm you? How can it threaten you? If, to use a common Vedantic metaphor, when you see the snake in a dark alley where there's only a rope coiled up on the ground, you superimpose a snake on that rope, how can that snake hurt you? That snake can't threaten you at all. It's not as real as you. The rope is as real as you in this metaphor. The snake is not as real as you, therefore it can't threaten you. And here is the final of our three kinds of inner transformation. The third kind of inner transformation is a recognition that the world is not as real as you, therefore the world can't threaten you. And that happens to include the coronavirus. Coronavirus can do some real damage to your body, and sadly the coronavirus has killed a great number of people. The coronavirus can't touch your consciousness. Your consciousness is utterly independent of the body, mind, everything. Okay. Now, so at this time of the pandemic, it's really important to stay engaged in your spiritual practice and prayer and meditation and spiritual study. It's also important to make sure you're taking care of loved ones, relatives and friends. Maybe you can't go and visit them, but you can certainly phone them, check in on them, and if they need something, or even if they just need some emotional support, someone to talk to, be sure that you're available to give them that support at this time. Okay, at this point in our anniversary celebration, we usually have a cultural program. In past years, we've had Indian classical music, we've had dance performances, Indian dance performances, and then in recent years, instead of having these kinds of cultural activities, I've been giving special presentations as a part of each anniversary celebration. So for this anniversary, I had planned to give a special presentation on the life and work of Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore, you probably know, was this great poet from Bengal, loved throughout India and the world, Nobel Prize winner, author of India's national anthems, it goes on and on. I had planned to give a live presentation on the life and works of Rabindranath Tagore, knowing that we couldn't meet for an anniversary celebration. What I did was I produced a video tribute to Rabindranath Tagore. I have that video loaded on my computer, and what I'd like to do, I'd like to share with you. I worked really hard on that video. I hope you'll like it. What I'd like to do now is to share that video with you. It lasts, I think, about 27 minutes. So I will start the video now. I hope you'll enjoy that video, and I'll come back and join you as soon as the video is over, and we'll have the concluding portions of today's anniversary celebration. So here is my tribute to Rabindranath Tagore. It's hard to imagine, but this immense funeral procession was not for a powerful head of state. It was for a poet. Then again, Rabindranath Tagore was much more than a poet. His incredible artistic genius endeared him to millions in India and around the world. Enormous crowds gathered to mourn his death in Calcutta on August 7th, 1941. I'd like to share with you my great love and admiration for Rabindranath Tagore. He's perhaps best known for his poetry, but he also wrote wonderful plays, captivating novels, and brilliant short stories. He composed lovely songs and painted striking expressionistic portraits. He was also an important educator. He founded Shantiniketan, a unique open-air school, as well as the prestigious Vishwa Bharati University. He was a major figure in the Brahmo Samaj, a religious reform movement. And, of course, he was the first in all of Asia to be awarded the coveted Nobel Prize. In 1861, when India was still a collection of princely states ruled by the British, Rabindranath Tagore was born in the city of Calcutta, or Kolkata as it's now known. Kolkata was the capital of British India, as well as its cultural capital, which it remains to this day. His father was Rabindranath Tagore, a philosopher and religious leader who was widely known as Maharshi, the great sage. The family name, Tagore, is an anglicized form of Thakur, as it's said in Bengali. Rabindranath founded the Brahmo Samaj reform movement, and much later made Rabindranath its secretary. Rabindranath's grandfather was Dwarkanath Tagore, an educated and wealthy industrialist who ensured that the family's stately mansion was an abode of culture, always graced with classical music, literature, and theatrical performances. Rabindranath was the youngest of 13 children, and he was known as Robi. He was mostly home-schooled by private tutors and subjected to strict discipline. He learned Sanskrit, English literature, physics, mathematics, and history, among other subjects. His creative gifts were apparent even as a child when he was drawn to write poems, some of which were later published. By 16, he had composed many short stories and several dramas for the stage in which he himself took roles. Sadly, he lost his mother around this time, which was the first of many tragedies in his life that would contribute to his lifelong artistic melancholy. When he was 19, Tagore went to England for further studies, but he was called back to Kolkata when his marriage to a 10-year-old girl named Mrinalini had been arranged according to the customs of that time. Much later, Tagore became a strident critic of child marriage. They eventually had 5 children, 3 of whom survived childhood. Tagore was very close to his sister-in-law, Kadambari, who nurtured and inspired his literary efforts. Her death, shortly after his marriage, plunged him into deep depression. At the age of 29, Tagore moved to a remote place called Shilaidaho in what is now Bangladesh to manage his father's estates there. His family later joined him in a sprawling country house built by his father. Tagore was fond of boating on the river Padma. The unspoiled natural beauty of the region seemed to stimulate his creativity as his writing continued day after day. His joyful embrace of nature is woven into much of his poetry, like in this little piece, written in his own hand in both Bengali and English. My fancies are fireflies, sparks of living light, twinkling in the dark. The same voice murmurs in these desultory lines, which is born of wayside pansies, letting hasty glances pass by. The butterfly does not count years, but moments, and therefore has enough time. When he was 40, Tagore moved with his family to Shantiniketan, about 100 miles north of Kolkata, where a guest house and prayer hall had been built by his father long before. Tagore planned to develop the site into a unique experimental school. As a boy, Tagore hated being cooped up in his family's mansion and sternly tutored for hours each day. He longed to be outside, surrounded by nature. This led him to establish a residential school in which all classes were held outside, under the shade of trees, taught by teachers who lived there, together with the students, and were more like friendly mentors than strict taskmasters. Tagore himself designed its curriculum and taught classes. His eldest son, Rabindranath, was one of its first students. Later, Tagore established a full-fledged university there, called Vishwabharati, whose alumni include former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and Nobel laureate Amartya Sen. Here in Shantiniketan is Tagore's youngest daughter, Meera, his son, Rabindranath, his daughter-in-law, Pratima, and his daughter, Bela. Sadly, Tagore's life at this time was marked by even more tragedies, as death successively took his wife, Mrinalini, one of his daughters, his father, Devendranath, and his youngest son. These many losses apparently led Tagore to consider human life to be as fragile, precious, and fleeting as a delicate flower. In this wonderful poem, Tagore compares his own life to a flower that must be offered in worship of God before it wilts away with time. This poem was set to music by me long ago, so children in our classes could sing it.
Pluck this little flower, take it, delay not. I fear it might droop and drop into the dust. It may not find a place in your garland, but honor it with a touch from your hand and pluck it. Pluck this little flower, take it, delay not. I fear it might droop and drop into the dust. I fear that the day ends before I am aware, and the time of offering goes by. Pluck this little flower, take it, delay not. I fear it might droop and drop into the dust. Though its color be not deep and its smell is faint, use this flower in your work, pluck it while there's time. Pluck this little flower, take it, delay not. I fear it might droop and drop into the dust.
The style of Tagore's poetry ranges from classical formalism to the mystical, visionary, and ecstatic. His approach can be traced to a lineage established by Vaishnava poets in the 15th and 16th centuries. Tagore was also influenced by the mysticism of the ancient rishis who composed the Upanishads, and by later spiritual figures like Kabir and Ram Prasad. Tagore's works were further enriched by his exposure to rural Bengali folk music. Over the years, respect for this great poet grew so much that he became known as Gurudev. Most of Tagore's works are in his native Bengali language, but Tagore himself translated some of his works into English. The most famous of these is a collection of poems called Gitanjali. When Tagore visited London in 1911, he met the famous British poet William Butler Yeats. Yeats read some of Tagore's translations and insisted that they be published in England. In 1912, the first edition of Gitanjali was printed. It consisted of 103 poems Tagore had selected from already published collections in Bengali. Here is the first poem from Gitanjali. Thou hast made me endless, such is thy pleasure. This frail vessel thou emptiest again and again, and fillest it ever with fresh life. This little flute of a reed thou hast carried over hills and dales, and hast breathed through it melodies eternally new. At the immortal touch of thy hands, my little heart loses its limits in joy and gives birth to utterance ineffable. Thy infinite gifts come to me only on these very small hands of mine. Ages pass, and still thou pourest, and still there is room to fill. The exquisite beauty of Gitanjali and its wildly enthusiastic reception in literary circles around the world led to Tagore being awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913. He wasn't able to attend the award ceremony in Stockholm, so he sent this message. I beg to convey to the Swedish Academy my grateful appreciation for the breadth of understanding which has brought the distant near and has made a stranger a brother. 2 years later, the British government conferred knighthood on him. Before Tagore won the Nobel Prize, few outside India knew much about him. But afterwards, he soon became a worldwide media sensation. Invitations poured in from all over the world, and Tagore began to travel extensively. Everywhere he was received with admiration and respect. Mahatma Gandhi visited Tagore in Shantiniketan and called him the Great Sentinel. Over his lifetime, Tagore's literary output was staggering. He wrote more than 1,000 poems, including entire stories in verse form. He wrote about 24 plays, including musical and dance dramas. He wrote 17 volumes of short stories, 8 novels, 4 novellas, and numerous essays on social, religious, and political issues. He wrote textbooks and edited literary journals. Tagore's plays were frequently performed during his lifetime and are still enjoyed today by thousands. Tagore himself took roles in some of his plays, as you can see in these old photos. Dozens of his works were adapted and produced as films in Bollywood and elsewhere by Satyajit Ray and other illustrious filmmakers. Tagore also composed the music and lyrics for many songs, more than 2,000 altogether. These songs are fondly known as Rabindra Sangeet and are extremely popular with Bengalis in India and around the world. Here's a brief rendition of a song by Debabrata Bishwas.
আমি কান পেতে রই, আমি কান পেতে রই, ওই আমার আপন হৃদয় গহন দ্বারে বারে বারে কান পেতে রই। কোন গোপন বাসের কান্না হাসের গোপন কথা শুনি বারে 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 কান পেতে রই।
Throughout Tagore's lifetime, India was embroiled in a long and tumultuous struggle for freedom from British rule. Tagore supported the Indian independence movement, as it was called. In 1917, at the opening session of the Indian National Congress in Kolkata, Tagore recited this stirring patriotic poem from Gitanjali, presented here in Tagore's own voice.
Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habits, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake.
Tagore had a lifelong association with Mahatma Gandhi. They met many times to discuss India's fight for freedom. Tagore's personal political views were complex. On one hand, he criticized British occupation and supported Indian nationalists. But on the other hand, he criticized the spellbinding nationalistic fervor of the freedom movement, saying, "There can be no blind revolution, but instead the steady and purposeful education of the people." Tagore's views enraged some extremists, and in one case placed his life in danger. During a visit to San Francisco in 1916, Tagore narrowly escaped assassination by some Indian expatriates. 3 years later, a horrifying massacre took place during a protest in Punjab's holy city of Amritsar, where British troops shot dead nearly 1,000 demonstrators. In response, Tagore wrote to the Viceroy, Lord Chelmsford, and repudiated the knighthood bestowed upon him just a few years before. After India finally won her independence in 1947, one of Tagore's songs was adopted as India's national anthem. Here it is, with Tagore's own English translation and recited by him as a poem.
Janagana Mana Adhinayaka Jaya He Bharat Bhagya Vidhata Punjab Sindh Gujarat Maratha Dravida Yuskala Banga Vindhya Himachala Jamuna Ganga Uschala Jaladhitaranga Tava Shubha Name Jage Tava Shubha Yashish Mage Gahe Tava Jaya Gatha Janagana Mangala Dayaka Jaya He Bharat Bhagya Vidhata Jaya He Jaya He Jaya He
Tagore always enjoyed drawing. He decorated many of his manuscripts with plants, vines, and strange creatures. At the age of 60, he took lessons from several artists and took up painting. In 20 years, he produced some 2,000 paintings, some of which were received with great acclaim in Europe and Russia. Tagore especially loved painting portraits. He painted self-portraits as well that seemed to reveal the dark side of his inner life. Tagore loved to travel. Between 1878 and 1932, he visited more than 30 countries on 5 continents. In his travels, he wanted to familiarize non-Bengali audiences with his works. He also wanted to spread his social and political ideas and raise funds for Vishwa Bharati University. He met many world leaders in the fields of science, literature, and politics. Tagore also carried out extensive correspondence with people around the world. He adorned some of his letters with little sketches and wrote to a man in the Netherlands, "I know it for certain that you are my brother in spirit, that for a long time you have been working for peace and truth and beauty in life." Tagore's last 4 years were marked by chronic pain and 2 long episodes of illness. In 1937, he fell into a coma and remained near death for weeks. After regaining consciousness, he wrote whenever he felt better, and the poetry he composed then is among his finest. Not surprisingly, those poems were often preoccupied with the subject of death. 3 years later, he suffered another coma from which he never recovered. In 1941, as World War II raged on and India was just 6 years away from independence, Tagore died on the 7th of August in an upstairs room of the very same mansion in Kolkata in which he was born. The world had lost an artistic giant whose genius would never be matched. Here is a poem in which Tagore anticipates his own death with a sense of deep gratitude. This poem, too, was set to music by me for our students.
When I go from here, let this be my parting word. When I go from here, I have tasted of the honey of the lotus that expands on the ocean of light, and thus am I blessed. When I go from here, let this be my parting word. When I go from here, in this playhouse of forms, oh, I have had my play. Here have I caught sight of him that is formless. When I go from here, let this be my parting word. When I go from here, my whole body and my limbs have thrilled with his touch. If the end comes here, then let it come. When I go from here, let this be my parting word. When I go from here, let this be
it would not be fitting to conclude this presentation with Tagore's death. After all, he lives on in his many works. So, here's a final poem, also set to music, in which he prays for the well-being of all the people of his country.
Let the earth, air, and water, and the fruits of my country be sweet, my Lord, be sweet, my Lord. Let the homes and the markets and the fields of my country be full, my Lord, be full, my Lord. Let the promises and hopes, words and deeds of my country be true, my Lord, be true, my Lord. Let the lives and the hearts of the children of my country be one, my Lord, be one, my Lord. 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 Be one, my Lord, be one, my Lord.
Welcome back. Just checking to make sure this is still working. I think it's still working. I hope you enjoyed my tribute to Rabindranath Tagore. Definitely comes from my heart because I have so much love and respect for him. I hope you could have a sense of that as you watch the video. At the at this point in each anniversary celebration, one of my favorite parts of the celebration is I have a chance to thank the many volunteers and supporters who help keep our ashram going. We have so many volunteers, and I think we have the best volunteers of any organization. Vasanti is clapping here over in the corner, and I agree with that completely. And you might be surprised to know that even while we're shut down now for these 3 months, our volunteers continue to be active. Volunteers come each week, they bring me food. Volunteers are coming to do gardening. Volunteers are coming to do maintenance. So our volunteers are just amazing. I'm so grateful. Thank you to all of our volunteers. Also, thank you to our donors. Even now, while we're shut down, many donors continue to send checks in the mail, which help us keep going. You know, even though our classes are interrupted, our utility bills are not interrupted. So we have ongoing expenses. So thank you to all the donors who continue to support our ashram's activities. I also want to especially thank the volunteers of our Jana Raksha community care program. I should mention that this program is now celebrating its 10th year. This is our 10-year anniversary for Jana Raksha community care. Excuse me. If you're not familiar with the program, let me describe it briefly. 10 years ago, we trained a group of volunteers to serve the community by giving various kinds of support. So support for depression, anxiety, and other kinds of mental illness. Support for marital problems and even domestic violence. Support for hospice care and dementia care. In general, emotional support. In fact, the motto of the program is friends helping friends, and that's very, very well said. So 10 years ago, we trained a group of 12 volunteers who work under professional supervision. And over these years, they've helped over 250 people. So I congratulate all of the volunteers of our Jana Raksha community care program. And if you're interested, on our website, you can find testimonials for from some of the people who've been helped by the program. You can also find the contact information for the program. Our volunteers continue to reach out, sometimes by phone, often in person. So if you or someone you know needs some help, you can find the phone number on our website. So, as we conclude our program, I'd like to say to all of our local New Jersey students, I really look forward to seeing you all back in this hall. Hopefully just a few weeks or a couple of months, but before long, we'll be meeting here together. And to all of you, first of all, thank you for watching this webcast, and I hope you'll continue to watch again every Saturday morning webcast at 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. And also, you know that I have many other videos and hundreds of lectures on our website. So I encourage you to make use of all those materials. And of course, during this time of pandemic, as I said, it's really important, crucial, to keep our ongoing spiritual practice going, and not just ongoing spiritual practice, but also reaching out to others to give them the support they may need at this difficult time. So, I should mention that if you'd like to be better informed about our programs, you can sign up on our website for program announcement emails on the homepage of our website. Also here on YouTube, you can sign up for, you can subscribe, and when you subscribe, be sure to click on that notification button. That way YouTube will notify you whenever there's a video or a live stream like this. So, as we conclude this program, I pray for the continued health and safety of you and your family at this time. I pray this virus expends itself very quickly so that we can all return to our normal lives. I look forward to seeing you next Saturday morning at this same time, and I hope I'll see you every Saturday morning at that time. I'm glad we can meet in this way. We'll conclude with our usual closing prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.